Hi, I'm Gregory Seth Harris, and I'll be reading from my satirical novel, The Perfect Stranger. My protagonist is identified only by the initial S, and he has come to town looking for someone, though he isn't quite sure who. But the novel is just as much about the townspeople as it is about S. S comes to rent the attic of C.D. Smollett, who owns the town's most successful bank and pizzeria. Smollett also decides to hire S as an assistant janitor, and in this scene, he has just proposed that idea to his normal janitor, Stubbs Farrago. "What the Samuel Hill I need an assistant for?" Stubbs frowned, leaning on his mop and challenging the banker with a hard, suspicious stare. The bank janitor and the bank president each stood their ground, said ground being the basement of the Smollett First Pedestal Bank and Pizzeria. A few yards away, S stared at his new shoes, hands clasped behind his back. Now, Mr. Smollett urged, placing a friendly set of fat fingers on the janitor's stiff shoulder, chewing on a thought before forcing a wan smile. "In the 17 years you've been with us, you've never had an assistant. Think of all the wisdom, the skill, the experience, the know-how you've accumulated. Don't you think it's time you pass some of that precocious wisdom on to a younger generation of up-and-coming maintenance engineers?" "Hail, Mr. Smollett, meaning no disneglect, but he ain't even one of us." Stubbs extended the arm that held the mop in the general direction of S. S stood motionless as the banker discussed the pros and the janitor countered with the cons of creating the coveted position of assistant janitor. "True, he's not one of us now," the financial officer conceded, "but who's to say what he could do? You teach him the skills of wielding the mop, the up and down stroke, the back and forth maneuver, the circular sweep, the figure eight, and I'll attend to his moral edification. Between you and me, we'll forge him into something any bank would be honored to have attending to its floors and polishing its doorknobs. What do you say, Stubbs?" The banker pulled the lone key dangling around his neck. S watched the two men, the skinny one in the gray uniform jangling a thick set of keys, the banker in his 5.5-piece suit fingering the single key. Both stood near a door painted with the ominous warning, "Private, for no one only. Keep out." "It ain't right, Mr. Smollett. I remember how I had to beg for weeks to get this here job. Back then, I was competing with my second cousin, and if it wasn't for me accidental-like chopping off a few of his fingers with that machete I happened to be carrying, in case I ran into a watermelon or something, you might have hired him instead. Now this fella just comes in off the street, no references, no experience, and you hire him on the spot." "Listen," the banker whispered, pulling his employee to one side. "I know it seems strange, me wanting to hire one of them." Both men locked eyes, then glanced over at S before locking eyes again. "But I have a good reason. This here is selection year, right? Doesn't it seem strange one of these guys suddenly appears in our town?" Receiving no answer, the banker repeated the question. "Doesn't it?" Smollett reached in his coat pocket, producing a full set of keys more formidable than the measly set his janitor held. The two men jangled their keys in unison. Stubbs finally nodded, though barely. "What I'm thinking," his superior continued, "is there's a conspiracy afoot, perhaps precipitated by a more radical faction of dregs, the ones that give the rest of your kind a bad name. Where there's one of these guys," the banker indicated S, "there's got to be more. You follow?" Again Stubbs nodded. "Now, suppose we hire one, sort of like a test dummy. And suppose he can't cut the mustard, like everything he does is wrong, and we make his life sheer hell. Do you think he'll be running back to his buddies and saying, 'Come on, I know where we can get jobs and maybe even impregnate a few poor men's daughters?' You get my drift?" "Loud and clear," Stubbs responded, grabbing his mop handle by both hands. "You can count on me, Mr. Smollett. I'll teach this guy everything he knows to be a miserable failure." I know you're the man to do it, the banker smiled, resting a hand on the janitor's shoulder. Only be subtle. Think of it like fishing. You don't pounce on a fish right away. You pretend to be going along with its plan to steal your worm, and just when it thinks it's gonna get away scot-free, wham! You reel it in. The banker pulled a cigar from his breast pocket, broke it in half, and handed the smaller half to the janitor. As my great-grandpapa used to say, it ain't torture if it's fast and painless. I gets your drift, Stubbs confirmed, momentarily resting his chin on the two hands clutching the mop, the half-cigar pressed between his lips. Come here, son, he called to S. S approached cautiously, looking from banker to janitor to banker, his look more a plea for mercy than an expression of confidence. So yous wants to learn my job, does ya? S nodded unenthusiastically. Well, you done chosen yourself a fruitful career, Stubbs boasted. Anywhere you goes, there's floors to be swept, halls to be mopped, linoleum to be scrubbed, scour and waxed, shelves to be dusted, trash cans to be emptied. You master these skills, and there ain't nowheres yous can't go, provided you got the right set of keys. The janitor jangled his keys proudly. Come here now. Let's first introduce you to your new co-workers, bleach, pneumonia, and scouring detergent. I'm sure you and the fellas will get along famously. You can learn more about The Perfect Stranger by visiting www.wagingart.com. It's available both in paperback and ebook, and if you click on Learn More, you can even order it from your local bookstore. Thank you for listening.